I don't want to yell across.
Yeah. Colleen, can you hear us? Okay, great.
Good. Hello.
Perfect. Thank you.
School board session. We stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Tonight we have with us Director Carey, Director Kincaid, Director Ledoux, Director Dane, and I am Director Beach, Dr. Middleton as well. Tonight is our special session to discuss the WASA management review. And first we'll hear from Dr. Middleton with the superintendent report.
Good evening. I know we only have about 90 minutes for a study session, but prior to hearing from our panel, I want to share a few items that have occurred since our first meeting that kicked off our management review back in May. I presented to the administrators, I presented to the board at least 3 times on some of the themes from the management report. I know they will be sharing from a 30,000-foot perspective in a few minutes, but I'll be more at the ground level at 5,000 feet. Clear the management report originally focused per our request was on special education, but it revealed to us that we also need to look at the whole educational system. In other words, this is not just a special education issue, this is a everyone issue. In light of the report and reflection, I do want to start by sharing what an outstanding week our administrative team had last week. One thing we tried not to do was make it an operational workshop. It's easy to talk about operations, but those are things that can be covered in a memo or an email or a short meeting. No, our week was focused on education. Our first day was about student behavior, not discipline, but student behavior. Administrators had a chance to talk about consistency of expectations throughout the school and district. We had someone from the ESD present to us on expectations. They went through the social emotional learning standards, and collectively, the team chose 2 of the standards to focus on this year. Standard 2, individuals can regulate emotions, thoughts, and behaviors. Standard 5, individuals can make safe and constructive choices about personal behavior and social interactions. Principals will work with their building teams to implement what this looks like. But as a district, we can share with families what we are working on and how they can support us. But prior to that meeting last week, I did connect with each principal and ask, can we have some common language and expectations throughout our schools? And the answer was absolutely yes. I shared this with you at our last meeting, and I was remote at the time. I'm pleased to show you the final product of what will be posted and discussed in every classroom space on the first day of school and every day after that as appropriate. This initiative, though, is only as effective as the commitment and fidelity we have to implement it. And as I shared, and I know it was not the best graphics being remote, but these key and core principles that we can agree on. And it doesn't matter what the age, students understand calm, they understand respect, they understand open. And what we love about this is it's not just about the student, but it's also about the educator. So it's not just what we expect from the student, but what the student can expect from us. And so we've already printed. These will be distributed and hung in every classroom and really be the foundation of those behavior expectations. Beth Mills also had time to review at our admin retreat our special education referral process with the administrative team and laid out clear expectations. She'll also be meeting with her staff at a special education retreat later this summer to make the process clear and effective. Also meeting with counselors and school psychologists to clarify those expectations and the points of contact along the way. On Wednesday, principals continued the work on our multi-tiered system of support and school improvement plans. Attendance was a key topic, as was inclusionary practices and interventions. At our August board meeting, Dr. Manns, along with the principals, will be presenting those school improvement plans. On Thursday, we invited our school attorney to bring us up to date on student discipline. Lots of good insight on what we have done well, and certainly the areas that we need to work on or change. Our last day was all about teacher evaluation. This was a good reminder that evaluation isn't something done to a teacher, but a year-long journey completed with the teacher. It is also about being consistent in our calibration from administrator to administrator and teacher to teacher. I know we look forward as a team for an excellent 23-24 school year. This summer, though, we've spent a lot of time talking about the management review and breaking down what are some of the things that we can do immediately and what will take time and take place over the next few years. It was noted that we have a lot of kindergarten referrals, and the question is, are they really special education students, or some just not at a point of skill acquisition, but will be with some non-special education intervention? Our response is to dedicate 2 paraprofessionals to the kindergarten team to assist with teaching how to do school, both academically and behaviorally. Beth has also noticed a trend of high referrals in preschool, and will be asking the same question. Question of, is it truly an identified need versus does the student just simply need more time to practice and master? She has also been in touch with fellow directors in the area who reported their district saw an influx of pre-K referrals in the 22-23 school year. Beth has also pulled together a team of 4 special educators to review the current one-on-ones to determine if intensive services are still required and what services can be faded. In addition, at the retreat, she will be laying out the expectation that for all students with special ed support, every IEP should have some level of independence. Our policy and procedures will be reviewed at the next regular board meeting to ensure our articulated process is included. In addition to policy and procedures, communication efforts will also increase with greater presence on our website, regular meetings with our administrators and special ed staff. The review panel recommended that a self-assessment occur that will in fact impact both special education and general education. Beth, Karen, and I will be discussing who else to include on that assessment and use the tools to focus on a few areas for long-range improvement. In general education, prior to a student even being referred to special education, there is an expectation that teachers and principals are working together to provide instruction and intervention, and until those are completed and documented, there will be no referral. This will also continue to be communicated to our admin and our teachers. Fiscally, most of our July has been finding that balance of providing services while being fiscally responsible and viable. I won't address any more on this as our last 2 meetings have been dedicated to our 23-24 budget. These are actions that are or will be taken immediately. There are areas that we need to improve systemically over the next few years. That process can begin immediately, but will take time to implement, review, refine, and report. In addition to the self-assessment, there is a call to continue in the short and long run our inclusive practices in training with buildings owning their MTSS plans, multi-tiered system of support plans, and professional learning communities that really drill down into student data and discussing and implementing best and successful practices so all students can be successful. Finally, as the management report states, and I'm sure our panelists will echo this in a few minutes, we have a hardworking staff. This report isn't about their dedication, but about the management and utilization of both our funds and our quality staff. I thank each person who has dedicated their lives to the education.
Thank you. Board, any questions? Before we go on, I would like to make a motion that we, well, actually, I guess, do I have to, can I do it as one or do I have to have 2 separate ones?
No, you do.
Okay, so then I'd like to make a motion that we insert 2 things. For 2C, insert public comments. And then for 2D, we'll then do question and answer. So 2B is the WASA management report review presentation. Then we'll take public comment and then we'll do question and answer after that point.
Question and answer for.
Yeah,
The
for the presenter, right?
That's.
The motion's been made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. All right, so we will go to 2B, the WASA management report review. I don't know which person.
Yeah, so I'd be happy to introduce Helene, Nancy, and Jacob. They were on our panel, and I'll let them tell a little bit about themselves. But as the report states, they've done this for WASA, coming into school districts to look at different management and operations and give us feedback. And they were just wonderful to work with, and I appreciated their dedication, their honesty, and recommendations for us to get better. So I'll turn it over to Helene or Nancy or Jacob.
I'm going to go ahead and jump on in there. I'm Helene Paroff, actually recently retired as WASA's Inclusionary Practices Project Director. Prior to that was one of WASA's Assistant Executive Directors, retired after, I think it was 44 years. Thank you so much for inviting us to be with you this evening. Had an opportunity to meet Madam Chair and our Vice Chair as well. So thank you so much again to all of you for having us here. We do have a short PowerPoint that can help lead us through the items that we addressed in your consideration. So that's going to be your call whether or not you'd like us to use that or just go along. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nancy to go ahead and introduce herself.
Good evening. I'm Nancy Meeks. I am also retired. I retired in 2020. Prior to that, I was the Executive Director of Student Services for Snoqualmie Valley School District. And prior to that, I was the Special Ed Director for Highline Public Schools. So as with Helene, I have been in the field of special education for over 40 years. Currently, I am a project lead for the Inclusionary Practices Project through WASA. Have been mentoring new special ed directors and as we did in Granite Falls, have been participating in the WASA management reviews. So turn it over to you, Jake.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm Jacob Cooper. I wish I was retired, but I'm not. So I have spent my first few years of my career as a state auditor, and then I've 18 years at Issaquah as their chief financial and operating officer, and I'm currently the assistant soup of finance in Yakima. So 20 years in school district finance and operations, and I've probably done between 15 and 20 WASA reviews across the state as well. So pleasure to be here this evening.
Thank you. So we want to see if you'll share the PowerPoint presentation.
I sure will. And please know that it is really just an outline, and Nancy, Jake, and I will take turns talking about some things. Interestingly, Dr. Middleton gave such a great introduction to the work that we did and things that we noted along the way. And quite honestly, you are to be applauded for the work that has happened since we left, since we provided draft and final report and through the month of July. So kudos to you, and there will be things that we will point out along the way. So let me see here. I'm going to, are you able to see my screen?
It's pretty small.
It's very small.
There we go.
There we go.
Better?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Truthfully, because of the limited amount of time that we have, I think I'm going to jump right on in the two slides, and we'll be happy to provide this to you afterwards, really speaks to the request that was made, which Dr. Middleton addressed. So I really want to start with this slide, and I'm going to see if I can. I'm working off of a laptop, and I have to admit that it sometimes just provides a little bit of a challenge to me. So I hate to use up time with my own operational error. So really, if you had an opportunity to review the report, you saw that we brought up some issues that were themes, and that really should be noted and re-noted, that those things that we reported on in the report were themes across stakeholders. They were not specific to position, to person, and as a matter of fact, as we aggregated information, we ensure that there is confidentiality throughout. So there were broadly 4 issues that emerged. There were those things that were district level needs, which Dr. Middleton began to or spoke to you about, and you have begun to address as a system. Then specifically, some themes emerged around the behavioral issues that are occurring, and we have some considerations for you. Again, some of which was addressed in Dr. Middleton's report, still in our thunder here, but that's all good news that you are and did take very seriously the things that we talked about that you knew were in existence in your system and began to address. So we'll talk about special education as well. And then an area that was a theme, absolutely, were fiscal implications. Want to, and we never want to fail to recognize, in addition to having the hardworking staff, and this is not a report that's about staff, it is clear about the dedication and the desire to be doing right by all the students within the system. And so throughout every single person we interviewed, we really did hear this theme and recognize the level of interest in addressing issues that seem to be really impeding student growth. There was also a great understanding, again, across all of those we interviewed, about the complexity of the issues, and acknowledging the fact that while COVID absolutely had an impact, not solely responsible for those things that are standing in the way of student growth, and that there is this desire to implement plans. I cannot tell you how many times we as reviewers heard, we're pretty good at creating plans, but we need to move into implementing plans. And it sounds like your activities over the past month have really dug into that. So considerations for you as a system again, and for you specifically, and there may very well be some questions or comments that come up later on, and you'll hear us go more in depth about it, is that, and I wish I had a direct quote about how it was said, that there really is this need to approach issues as a cohesive level, district level leadership team. We use the term speaking with one voice, and that happens as a result of shared understandings, clear communication plans, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Another critical complementary priority is really seeking to address what appears to be a crisis situation involving students who are exhibiting behavioral challenges, starting with our littlest ones or your littlest ones, moving through, I would say, probably through elementary, middle school. We heard less of that at the high school level. And then attending to specific issues related to the provision of special education services, whether it be programmatically, procedurally, and fiscally. And it sounds like you've already begun to address that. So without being redundant, we really do want to speak to that the student growth within Granite Falls School District belongs to everyone. So what you're going to hear from us is a theme that these are your children. These are not special ed children or general education children. They are all your children. So how do you as a district level team come together, general education, special education, throughout your system, district office to building level to classroom level, engage the community, and those arrows work both ways throughout the system. So the more cohesive you are, the more coherent you are speaking with that one voice that we spoke of. You have a strategic plan. And so really embracing how do you use that strategic plan to build your district-wide cohesiveness. And then, again, I feel as though I'm repeating myself, so I apologize for that. That collaboration between general education and special education, the teaching and learning, you were addressing standards just these past few weeks, how vitally important that is in speaking with that one voice. And there was also discussion about inclusive practices, and Nancy and I can attest to this in the work that we've been doing through WASA's Inclusionary Practices Project, although this happens with other projects and in districts throughout our state, is oftentimes the greatest efforts, the greatest growth that we see is when inclusive practices is actually not owned by special ed, that it is viewed as a general education, a teaching and learning. It really speaks with a very loud voice of these are all of our children, they all belong. What is it that the system needs to do to help support those so that students with disabilities, students whose first language is not English, regardless of group, are supported? So clear understanding throughout your system and that commitment to inclusive practices. Then we're going to shift gears, and I'm going to turn this over to Nancy to speak to behavior issues.
So
thank you.
Thanks, Elaine. So I'm just going to say, it sounds like some of this has already started based on what we just heard. I want to go back. Oops, there, thank you. So really the understanding, reviewing current data, building level practices that respond to behavior sounds like the principals and the administrative teams really looked at that recently, which is great. That consistency, that common language, common expectations is so important for kids to get that experience. So that is a great start. And that was one of the things. And as part of that is to look at what data system you're going to look at so that you can have this ongoing look at how are we looking at behavior so that it's consistent across all buildings. And then from that, you want to develop and implement a plan to address the needs, both that are coming out from both the district and building level based on that review. So I'm sure that as the principals continue to work together, there'll be some plans to address those needs, whether it be at the individual classroom level, whether it's at the building level, or if there are some district supports that are needed. And certainly there are going to be those students that even with the best plans that the general ed, the classroom, there are going to be those students that kind of rise to the top that need something more. And it's going to be important that there's strong collaboration between general education and special education to address those needs. So that can be that discussion as well. And then I think an ongoing need for everyone in our system is ongoing professional development that is responsive. So what is it that the building, what is it that the teachers need? What are the paraeducators need in terms of their understanding of behavior, in terms of the plans in place? And it sounds like you also had some information from your attorney speaking about discipline. So I think all those things, it just sounded, I was just so pleased to hear. It sounds like the buildings are off to a good start with behavior. So you can go on to the next one, Helene. There it is. Okay. So special education, I think, you know, it's always good for special educators. It's sometimes we don't take the time to kind of take a step back and develop a clear vision of special education services within a district. And because that does take time to reflect and really look at what do we want for our students in special education. So I just think it's a good thing for the district to do, to have that be a joint thing with building principals. Their building leadership is so important in the delivery of special education. So just be able to have that clear vision, and then as you develop plans to support students, you always have that in the forefront of where you're going. And honestly, it should be tied to the district strategic plan. So one of the things is again, I'm going to kind of sounding like a broken record here, but it sounds like you're already doing it, is to review and develop district procedures for services. So it sounds like you looked at the referral process, which is great. Looking at paraeducators, all those procedures are necessary for both building administrators to totally understand, teachers, so that you have that consistency across the buildings. And again, that's what I said in the third bullet, is to clearly communicate. How you do that as a district is up to you. Some districts do a procedural manual, but as we all know, once things are written down, they change. But how does everyone know what those expectations and those procedures are? And then again, it sounds like that you're already on this, is reviewing current paraeducation staffing, both at the building level, and create a process to determine what, if additional paraeducation staffing is needed, and it will be, it doesn't, there are times when additional one-to-one supports are needed, but what is the process? What is the procedure to request that, so that we can make sure that it's truly needed, and that we have done everything else in terms of program, in terms of other interventions, before we look at adding more staff time. So I think that's really important to do. And it should be something that, if there is paraeducator time, that's something that part of the annual IEP process should be part of that review, so that you can look at when can we provide more independence for a student, when can we remove some of those supports. So it's an ongoing kind of process of looking at those supports. And then certainly special education, the building, you can't underestimate the power and the importance of a building leader. So that ongoing collaboration with district and building leadership to support students in special education. Okay, Jake.
Thank you. So first, before I begin, I'd like to thank the board and the superintendent, particularly around managing finances. It's not an easy time in K-12. And so you should be proud of that. Post-COVID, high inflationary environment, enrollment fluctuations. You're fortunate that you have a positive enrollment growth, hopefully coming your way. But again, I wanted to thank you. And I think a testament to the organization is how you respond when you need to adjust your programming or staffing levels and your expenditures. And so you should be, I'll thank you for that on a personal and professional level. So I was tasked with reviewing the finances, both kind of at a broader district level, and then ultimately how it was relating to special education and special education staffing. This was one of the, first off, I did do a trend and analysis of Granite Falls fund balance, trend over time. And of course, I recommended at least a 10% minimum fund balance, both for liquidity and stability both. And you can see, and I don't know if you have the report before you, so the numbers I think speak for themselves, and that mirrors somewhat of your policy, but added a little more fund balance to it. And ultimately, what I found fascinating in your data was when I was able to compare the growth of special education enrollment to the growth of special education paraeducator staffing. And that is one of the few times I have seen the numbers really show the dramatic change in program. And so as you can see, one thing to highlight was special education enrollment was up by 5.2%. And then special education staffing increased by 117%, at least paraeducator staffing did during the same time frame. And so that of course, the financial data fits the interview and the narrative data that both Helene and Nancy brought forward in their part of their presentation. So there was not on the fiscal side, it was apparent to the reviewer, that you were spending greater than the average on your special education expenditures, both in the county and the statewide level. And most of that is driven by excess or additional paraeducator staffing as it relates to your special ed students. And so that was the overarching findings from my financial report. Again, we also talked about the use of safety net funds. You should be congratulated on your aggressive approach to safety net. It is needed, particularly when you have high cost children that exceed that threshold. However, it does take a lot of money, district expenditures, before you get to that threshold, which is what I was trying to map out for you in part of that presentation, just to show you that there are students that definitely qualify because of their condition and for excess staffing and expenditures, but for the most part, some of those appear to be driven by the need to qualify for safety net, which is not for its sake. It's not on its own a reason to go to access safety net funds, is what I'm trying to say. So any questions on the fiscal impacts? I'm fortunate that I have hard numbers to go by and able to put pretty charts and graphs together. So in that regard,
I think we'll ask our questions
Yeah.
after that.
Yeah, we're gonna do Q&A after our public comments.
okay, thank you. Sorry, I'll ramble on. It's hard when you're presenting and there's no, I can't see you all on the screen. So is there another slide on the fiscal implications, Aline, or do you think I missed anything? That was the flyover, I believe, of the fiscal findings and recommendations.
Correct. So really our last slide is just one. Again, I'm having a hard time. It was just closing thoughts and questions.
Yep.
So why don't we stop there, and Madam Chair, turn it back over to you, or however it is that you want to conduct this, and I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay, thank you. We appreciate the presentation. We did insert public comment. We have some people in the room that have asked to speak. So we inserted public comment after the comment. Then we will do Q&A from the board based on the report and the presentation.
You want to read the speech?
You know what? Is it here? Here it is. All right. I really have to read the whole thing. All
You
right.
ask me that every time.
I know, it's long. I feel like because it's a small community, we sort of know each other. So I always want to make the short thing even shorter. Comments will be limited to 5 minutes or less. Personnel matters are not permissible during items from the floor and are to be addressed to the principal of the school or the superintendent in writing. The board, superintendent, and district personnel do not engage in direct conversations or give feedback during the meeting. However, the board members may ask clarifying questions regarding the subject matter exclusively. And the board president may interrupt or terminate an individual statement when it's too lengthy, personally directed, abusive, obscene, irrelevant, or concerning a legal matter. Questions or comments from those addressing the board may be referred to the superintendent or staff for follow-up at a later date if needed. In essence, board action and discussion is limited to previously published agenda topics, and this limitation is based on the legal requirements for RCW 42.30. And those policies are within the 1000 series in our policy. So, Ms. Stewart. Thank you.
My name is Rebecca Stewart. Some of you know me, some of you don't. We moved our family to Granite Falls in 2007, specifically so our kids could be raised in a small town, just like we were. We were fully aware of the pros and cons in a small district. In 2008, a tragic event occurred and a healthy infant was shaken near death by her biological father. We were in the right place in our lives to bring that little girl into our family. At 5 months of age, after she spent 30 days in NICU and another month in a medically fragile foster home. Lindsay was given a life expectancy of 4 to 5 years. She turned 15 this summer. We have 2 typically developing children. Our oldest graduated from Granite Falls High School in 22, and our son is going into his high school, his senior year at Granite Falls High School. I have volunteered in almost every building in this district over the last 14 years. I have walked Lindsay into class every day since she started in this district at 3 years of age in the DB3 program. I am her eyes, her ears, and her voice. That being said, I am currently appalled with the administration's handling of our finances and subsequent actions. We, the voters, just passed a levy to maintain programs and services. Unlike Marysville voters, why are we cutting 13 classified positions when the first thing you see on the Granite Falls School District website is we're hiring? I have spent quality time in the life skills classroom and have sent more than one email over the years regarding the state of the life skills classroom. Knowing that you're reducing the amount of paraeducators in the life skills classroom is not only going to severely disrupt the education process, it is going to become a safety issue. I read the 20-page report that recommends you reduce your paraeducator numbers. However, common sense would tell you that you can't cut paras before you reduce the number of one-on-one students. My personal recommendation for the administration and school board is to look at the top-heavy administrative roles as a place to start cutting jobs. I can think of 2, maybe 3 roles that if you cut it, it would not directly affect the students in the Granite Falls School District like it will when you cut 11 paraeducators. How can you cut 11 paras when you're already shorthanded in that role? We have seen it year after year. There are not enough paras in the classroom. SPED teachers are getting no breaks, so the paras can have theirs. There are certain job titles that are being paid an exorbitant salary for the craptastic job they are actually performing. I would also like to mention that there is currently no SPED teacher for the life skills classroom at Granite Falls High School. I am not sad the position is open. The last teacher spent maybe a total of 5 times in one-on-one with Lindsay over the entire year. And the only reason the board didn't get another email from me regarding that was because Lindsay has a freaking awesome para-educator. She should be getting paid to be Lindsay's teacher because that's the role she has played for Lindsay. And I will close with my hopes that the Granite Falls School District doesn't pull what they did for Lindsay's first year at the middle school, where they placed a substitute teacher that had 0 special education background into the job and made no real effort to replace her until I started emailing the board again.
Thank you. Any clarifying questions, board? Thank you. Appreciate your comments. Next, we will move to section 2D, the question and answer for the VASA report. Board, who would like to start?
Can I start?
Mhm.
I don't have questions and answers for Wassa or questions for Wassa. I just wanted to thank you guys for being here though, to talk to us. I have more of a statement for everyone in this room. After we got this report and through the past couple meetings that we've gone through, you know me, it takes me a couple meetings to sit and really think things over and come up with some educated thoughts. And so in my fashion, I wrote them down. So please excuse me as I read them to you all. And before I read them, I want to say that this isn't attacking any specific person. So I don't want anyone to feel that way. This bed problem that we're having is not a new problem that we're facing. Back in 2018, I, as a parent, met with the sitting superintendent, Linda Hall, and asked these same questions, particularly why the sped numbers were so high. Back then, the numbers were not at all different from what they are now, and were and continue to be significantly higher than the state standard. The difference then was we didn't have many paras, and chaos and, dare I say, terror was occurring in the classrooms. I know that terror is a big word, but when my 6-year-old came home and she was terrified to be in her classroom, terror. Sorry, it's emotional. Classrooms were being evacuated several times a day, and the time frame from when a student was referred for an IEP and being assigned an IEP was months and months and months long, leaving students in the classrooms without support. This time is an issue, the same as it is now. But where was the outrage then? This situation predates a lot of people in this room, but some of you were here. Oh, that wasn't this one. And those of you that weren't, you inherited garbage. And instead of working to clean up the garbage, you've let it fester. Now, as we look at budgets, we see that a lot of our money is being thrown at SPED and paras, of course. Well, yeah, we let things get out of control. Teachers are not allowed to do anything about behaviors, and they are afraid to take rate response training because they're afraid of being sued for any wrong move. And so we're left with chaotic classrooms and only have a few paras to help out. The response I'm hearing is working towards moving students from SPED to Gen Ed and phasing out of IEPs as a solution to our outrageous numbers. But how can you even fathom that and still want to get rid of paras? And to also expect that a couple hours at School of Rock or behavior management training is going to solve all of our problems. I'm telling you now that it won't. Unless the procedure is so amazing and cutting edge and phenomenal in phasing students out of SPED to the point where they can be Gen Ed without support, I don't see that happening. So again, I asked, where was this outrage 5, 6, 7 years ago? And now we're in a situation. I understand that the money going to SPED was the red flag and is the easiest attempt at fixing our budget, but we also need to understand that we have a lot of flaws in other places. We have asinine contracts that are causing us to hemorrhage money. And when we had the opportunity to garner funds through attrition, we went and hired some positions that were not an utter necessity. So to say we tried to fix budget woes through attrition, well, that was kind of a fail. I'm not going to lie, I was a little upset at Dr. Middleton's email to staff the other day, somewhat placing blame on the school board for insisting on a better general fund percentage and thusly causing the need to lay off some people. I felt that there were some of you who should stand up and take accountability for the state of the district and where we are not. But as I do, I sat and I thought about it. And you know what? This is on each and every one of you, even the school board. And I know a lot of us weren't on the school board in 2018 or before, but we also inherited this garbage. So it's all of our faults. We have got to stop pointing fingers at each other and turn those fingers back at ourselves and figure out what each and every one of us can do to fix this and to work together. We talk about wanting parent and community partnerships, but we need a partnership with each other as well. It takes all of us.
Thank you.
Questions? I took a lot of notes. And then even during the presentation, then I'm writing down like more questions as they're popping into my head. But then I paused and I wrote something because I understand that there's a limited nature to this assessment that we reviewed.
But I see all the suggestions from sped to finance, general ed, behavioral, everything, and a lot of it feels really ambiguous to me, right? Right, we're all elected to represent the why of the community, like why are we here? Why are we doing this? And then it's the district's responsibility to implement the how, right? And we strongly lean on the expertise of the people that are put in these positions to work forward with the how. And like I said, I'm not an educator by trade. I just know that, once again, limited nature of this assessment, but I read a lot of it and I look and say, build a strong and cohesive leadership team. I mean, there's a big part of me that goes, was that not a plan before? Right? Like, I mean, were we like, no, we want to be disjointed and separate. Right. And when we see like, oh, we need a special education plan, like, was there not one? Like, and so when I see things like this, I mean, my question ultimately goes to the people that will be implementing the how. So like Beth, when you see develop a clear plan, Dr. Middleton, when you see build a strong cohesive team, and when Marshall sees consider a 10% fund balance. Like my big question to those of you carrying out the plan with this is this new information to you? And if so, and will you be able to accomplish the goal of students achieving strong educational outcomes? If this report gives you all the information, then great. I'm curious about what timeline and expectations that I should have, right? Because is this a 6-month thing, a year thing, a 5-year thing, right? Because the last thing that you want to do is pull the plug when it takes a while to turn the ship or something along those lines. But if not, what do we need to be confident in the plan for it? Because like I said, when I see this, it seems very ambiguous. It sounds like there's a lot of excitement in there. It's hard for me to get as excited when building a strong, cohesive leadership team is a really big ask, right? Like what are the mechanisms in place when, right, you have a process, but if that process breaks down, how are we agile, right? Because so much that I found in public office and school districts and everything with unions and all the stuff is that I get so much of that's just how it is. And it is so painful to have to deal with. And that's always been my big thing is how can we be agile? Because partway through the year, when we realize something that we didn't know in the past, how can we turn at least that one little bit, not turn the entire ship, but turn that thing so that we can keep the ship going in the correct direction so that we should. So I guess my ultimate question is this enough? And or the people that are going to be executing this feel comfortable with it? So I guess that would be.
I don't think that was a rhetorical question.
Yeah, I mean, that would be, yeah. So like Beth or Dr. Middleton, like I would love to know if this is good.
From here, Josh?
You can start, then I have some thoughts.
Okay, from here. Okay, well, the thing that excited me the most, to be perfectly honest, was the recommendation that the director had some responsibilities peeled off so that she can focus on this work.
Okay.
And also the recommendation of doing a self-assessment to help really focus the work. And Josh referenced that. I actually met with Nancy and she gave me a tool that she had been given that she used as a director. And really, I think it's going to help us focus on where, what's a few places that we really need to focus, including some timelines, and hopefully, have some time to actually focus on that. With a few responsibilities being taken off.
Okay.
I think you raise a good point. Aren't those common expectations? Well, certainly they are. I think one of the missing pieces is simply fidelity. I mean, you go to a school district, you would expect that before there's a referral, that a teacher is doing everything possible to individualize that, meet with that student, have conversations with parents. And I'm not saying this is across the board, but I think the movement to one-on-one was sort of a quick default. And I believe that our panels would even say that's probably somewhat of a common practice in this post-pandemic. But again, we had problems before the pandemic as well. So for me, it's this is returning to more of a tight versus loose oversight. And I know that just in the last meeting, I thought we gave pretty specific things on reports financially on things becoming very tight. The tightness on this fidelity is, I mean, that falls to me also, working with principals and with Dr. Manns and Ms. Mills on meeting with principals regularly, that, you know, really what it comes down to, do we know what's going on in classrooms? I mean, that is ultimately where we want our principal to be, in classrooms every day, so they can report back to us, yes, we are following this process or this procedure, and not skipping any steps. And so, no, we don't have a document to hand you right now, but as I stated, before anyone gets a referral, there has to be a documentation that we have tried every single intervention first.
Yeah. Well, and to be very clear too, right? Like I'm not going to speak for the board, but I assume the goal is not to micromanage at all. In fact, I would love the exact opposite. I want to, that's why I'm asking, are you comfortable with it? Do you feel like you can execute? Because the last thing I want is it to go back to, what was it, 3 or 4 weeks ago when Tina's breaking down because we can't, like, how did it get to this point? Right? What are we doing to make sure it doesn't get to that point, you know, again? And so that's why I look at the people that will be, you know, to Carly's point, we're all part of it, but there's checking in, there's oversight, there's actually boots on the ground, like you said, right? You'll be in there, all the administrators, building and admin, teachers, everybody. Just, if we feel good with it, then once again, I have to lean on your expertise, because that's why we have you in these seats, right? So that's just knowing that you are comfortable and you feel really good about it is great. It's just that when I read the report, I go, it feels very much so like the doctor telling me that you need medicine, and you're like, for what? You're right. It's like, well, no, duh, I need medicine, but it's not prescriptive enough in my eyes. So if you guys feel good, then that's my main concern. So
I'm going to just make a quick comment, but not ask questions yet. But to say, I went through all 20 some odd pages in OneNote, and I broke your paragraphs out into actual checklists of things to do and an outline of, if we were to actually take the advice that we've been given, what would that look like? It's a long list, y'all, but it's actually very doable. And I think that there are some points that like, it is prescriptive in some ways, right? Where it says, you know, as far as MTSS, do an inventory around belief, skills, and systems, identify the gaps, articulate the vision, and then school leadership teams need to be able to articulate their expectations within the context of their own setting. And then a clear, well-communicated, well-supported implementation plan based on the district vision and goals. So if you break it down, like, but you got to dive in, because you're right, there's no section that says this, do these 5 things and you're going to be way better off. That being said, there definitely is, as we go through behavior, right? It talks and it goes into like special, and I'm seriously not going to read you all 20 pages, obviously, right? But it talks about special education, you know, has the turnover of leadership, lack of consistent leadership. There's inconsistent practices, confusions of roles and responsibilities, and lack of departmental identity. And it said that special education department must establish a clear vision for services, right? And have all central and building level administrators understand the services that are, they're a supplementary support. So I think those things are important. Then it goes down and there's actually things, right? There's things to do. But I'm gonna hammer on this same drum I've hammered on every single meeting. It is critical. I put a red flag and a star next to this one. It is critical for procedures regarding the allocation of paraeducator staff to be developed and followed by all staff. Appropriate first step is to review all one-on-one paraeducator positions at this time and determine if any of the current allocation could be reduced or shared. And then there's a part, and I highlighted it. Oh, shoot. There's 20 pages of highlights. But anyway, there's a part where it absolutely says that it should not say, where is it? Oh,
In the fiscal section.
no, actually, well, it says that it should not say one-on-one support, but but the IP should say guarantees paraeducator support. Why is that important? Because it gives the ability, when we put prescriptive one-on-one, that para can only support that one child, but does that one child need all day, every day? And is that the least restrictive environment for that student, right? I'm not a special education provider, but I can think that that's probably not the least restrictive environment, looking at it from my view. And so the ability to change that wording allows us some flexibility to support other students as needed, perhaps a classroom. I don't know how that implements, I don't get to, but just the wording change. And so I've asked back in the draft phase and now at the final phase that we send out those invitations to review the IEPs now. We don't need a whole committee to review them because we know which ones say one-on-one. Send the invites. There's no teacher that has anything on their calendar yet, and parents would have plenty of time to get a day off of work if they needed to or whatever, or reschedule or respond. But it gives us the flexibility and to not carry this additional financial burden forward into the school year. That's what I'm saying about that part. I want to defer to you guys because I really have so much I could. So, Director Carey, would you like to?
Yeah, I've got some questions for sure, but I guess let me start with just a couple of quick comments. So when we started on this path, I remember having a conversation with Dr. M because we were having a lot of conversation related to Granite Falls and is there something about, the students or the services or something that happens inside of the Granite Falls School District boundaries that is the SPED numbers and what we have to do from a SPED situation is a result of that? Or is it the opposite? Is there something about the way that Granite Falls from a programmatic, from an overall standpoint that's resulting in the challenges that we have in this area? And I remember saying to Dr. M, is there someone that can come in and evaluate us or something along those lines? So and Dr. M, I really appreciate you being able to connect with WASA and for the WASA team to be able to do this information, because it's been extremely valuable for me to really try to get a hold of it. And what I've said this before, what it appears is that we have a programmatic issue. We are an anomaly. So you say, well, Carl, how do you get to those conclusions? Well, there's a couple of items in here that talks about our FER analysis of certificate and classified staffing levels, and SPED reveals that Granite Falls has the inverse classified and certified staffing levels compared to the state. Granite Falls is not in line with the Washington State School District on delivery of special education services. Granite Falls expends 18.1 of its budget on SPED, while the state average is 13.5. So, and then kind of the culminating piece for me is the growth in paraeducator support is not being driven by increased enrollment, but rather a change in how Grand Falls serves students. When staff growth outpaces enrollment growth, is a recipe for financial insolvency. Okay. So kind of along your points, Peter, what that says to me, okay, the way that this area is being managed is not in line with potentially with other districts. And I guess I'll just leave that there. But I guess I also want to say that to Dr. M's point and to a little bit to Director Kincaid's point, this isn't a problem that happened yesterday. We've always had challenges in this area, and we've kind of been chasing our tail and stuff like that. And as the only board member that was here in 2018.
I wasn't.
No, wait, no, I want you to hear this.
Yes.
You're right. It's my fault. And I don't mean that as a negative, right? If I'm going to be a leader and I was sitting in this chair, the buck stops here, right? And I take that, you're absolutely right. And for that reason, not only that reason, but also that reason, I'm determined to fix this, right? And the fixing can't be done by me. The fixing has to be done by the team, but I have to support and encourage the team to do that. So we've spent a lot of time talking about the problems. Now I want to talk about solutions. I'm hoping that we can turn the page and we can talk about, okay, where do we go to from here? So one of the things that I wanted to talk about, I split this up into 4 areas, big areas. Director Veach has done a much better job: financial, common vision, behavior, and educational excellence. And I talked about this at last meeting a little bit, Dr. M. But on the financial and how specifically we're addressing this area. So I guess I just want to ask, so for financial, it's kind of the new policy, right? The policy related to fund balance and stuff like that, and then reporting to the board when that seems like it's going to go sideways or something along those lines. To me, that does that in a way that doesn't necessarily micromanage you, but gives you the guardrails and stuff like that. So I feel pretty good about where we're there now, and certainly stop me if you don't, if you feel different. But on the other items, on the common vision, on the behavior and the educational excellence, I know we talked about the SOP and stuff like that. The team brought up the strategic plan and maybe having a strategic plan. I don't necessarily know where we are timeline with all of that stuff, like when we're going to, or what the board's involvement or what you need from us on that other stuff. It seems a little vague to me. So I was wondering if you could talk about those items really quickly. I know I'm catching off guard, but
Yep, that's
so the common vision, the behavioral, because I agree, as I've been here before when we've had we're evacuating classrooms, behavior issues. I saw you talked about your poster and kind of that common, but for the situations and the things that doesn't work, I guess, how are we addressing that? And then, that educational excellent piece, if you don't mind.
Let me go to the area that I've probably spent more time on in the last 4 years, and that's on the academics. And, we still have some schools that are way underperforming, but even the underperforming school is starting to see an upward trend. So again, we don't want to be in the red, but at least the trend line is going up. We're seeing some really nice data coming out of Mountain Way and Monte Cristo. I'm really pleased with their professional learning community format and just the leadership that's going on there. The work that needs to be done is really what I shared just a few minutes ago, and that is, has to be about fidelity. And that's where, Dr. Manns and I talked this morning, and she said, I'm going to have to live in one building to ensure, something is carried out. And really, I look at Beth, myself, and Karen, that will be our job next year, to ensure that there is that fidelity. And a lot of it has to do with teaching to the standards, providing interventions, using our data. And that might feel a little squishy, but our principals know this is the path, and it's not a new path this year. We've been working on this we started 4 years ago, and then when we're interrupted, we resumed that. And it was certainly better last year. And this year, as we send more and more people to professional learning community training, that's just going to be that much stronger. So I actually feel really good about where we're headed on the academic. And I've said the last couple of meetings, this year and next year are going to be breakout years for us. And so that's going to be something to celebrate. Common vision. I'm with the WASA board in that we do need to go back to our strategic plan and make sure that we're referring to those 5 standards in everything we do, and really everything that we bring to you. I mean, to me, it's a really strong strategic plan, but we need to put some of the specifics behind it. And I think you'll see that in the school improvement plans that come in a few weeks. The behavior is certainly the most challenging one. But we are taking the WASA recommendation, and it is starting with some basic building blocks of what are the common expectations that we can put in place. And I agree with Director Kincaid. It's not going to be addressed all in one setting at School of Rock, but behavior is also one of the parts of the multi-tiered system of support, which means we need to be using our Wednesdays to be talking about that, because behavior impacts academics. And so that's a constant conversation. And then as we work with our principals this summer, we need to get out of the business of cornering students that escalates, but we need to be providing sort of it's not really a new approach, but I think it might be newer to Granite Falls, that it's not, we need to find some grace in here and find, sort of that relief valve and meet that student where they're at. And again, I know that's all squishy, and this is probably, it's not just our district, it's every school district in the Washington, if not the country, that are asking themselves, how are we going to address this? But it really does start with some basic building blocks that we've been talking about.
So I guess, let me just lean in a little bit more.
Okay.
So specifically, like to do these things, to affect positive change, what specifically do you need from the board, if anything, for us to get where we need to go? Like, or I guess, kind of in the vein of what Director Ledoux, like what didn't you have that now you feel like you have, and maybe it's some of this stuff, and then more so moving forward, what specifically do you need from the board? And then my follow-up would be then, okay, so then, because I'm reading a book called The Effective Traits of a High-Performing School Board. And one of the things that it talks about is that if you look at high-performing districts, they have high-performing, well-functioning school boards. And the traits of those, and one of those is empowering your superintendent to do instructional change, to do what they need to do, and then getting out of the way, right? And that is the beauty of the system. And Director Ledoux is absolutely right. I don't want to micromanage you because I can't, right? No more than you can micromanage me with elevators, right? You have no idea what I do. But I need to know that you got what you need, and how we will know how I can check in effectively throughout the process and know that the train is still moving in the right direction. If I can have those two things, then I can rest on whatever decisions that you make.
Well, let me give you a short answer right now, and I'll think about to give you a little bit more complete answer.
Yeah.
Maybe at our next board meeting. Prior to the pandemic, we had changed our board agenda a little bit. so that academics were always the first thing we talked about. Then we had 2 years of nothing but operations. And so I want to return to us talking about student performance, academics, and that's the multi-tiered system of support. We're talking about attendance, we're talking about behavior, we're talking about academics. So if we can design a board meeting so that I know fund balance is a top priority, but we spend a lot of time talking about that and we feel like we have a plan going forward. Let's return to student performance as a real priority at our board meetings. And I can work with our board chair on what that can look like, but that's my immediate response this evening. I'll come up with some other areas of support as well.
Okay, just a couple more if you don't mind. Related to, and this is for the WASA team. I guess you guys mentioned the strategic plan a couple of times. I was a member of the team when we went through the strategic plan that we've had now for a number of years. When you guys mentioned a strategic plan, are you asking for essentially a brand new, that was a pretty lengthy process where we brought in like a facilitator and stuff like that? Or are you talking about a holistic strategic plan for the district or kind of a specialized strategic plan in this area?
I'm going to give it a go in answering you. And I would say that our sense was use what you've got. You don't need to start the process over again, yet dig more deeply with thoughts that have been reinforced and or new thoughts that you think about, ultimate goal for your students. And I think, and Nancy spoke for a vision and a specific plan for special education, but truly our belief is that they've got to be part of each other. So it's digging in more deeply, ensuring that there really are shared beliefs and shared understandings. And when we say, for example, all children belong, what does that really mean so that when we walk away from that, we do have an operationalized definition? And that's just one example. So we're not saying throw out what you've got at all. You rather use it as the basis for moving further and deeper, if you will.
Got it. So I guess going on to that question too, you guys have been in this a very long time, and I don't know, have you ever done an initial evaluation like this or a review like this, and then been asked to come in at a later date and kind of do a checkup, a follow-up, a review of the efficacy of whatever they did to kind of give them okay, here's where you're at, you're on the right road, or maybe, turn a little bit more this way. Have you guys ever been asked to do something along those lines?
I have.
So is there, I guess, is when you look at those districts, right, from A to B, is there any significant traits or changes or anything you could point to where, okay, they did, certainly they listened to my report, but because they did these two things differently really well, they got really good. I mean, I know I'm not looking necessarily for a magic bullet or anything. I guess I'm just looking at what other successful districts that have done this work, some of the things that your takeaways that they started to do really well that helped them turn.
I think from my perspective, it's about buy-in and leadership. And I've heard quite a bit around the board table this evening. So your conversations and then ultimately your support are what make things move forward. Because if we write a report and it just sits on the shelf, that's all it is, just a report. It has no teeth to it. We come in, we interview, we pull data, we pull out themes and give our best professional recommendations, what we see happening. But ultimately, your system, your superintendent and the board of directors has to carry out what's in the report, if it's supported by the organization. And so that's what I see when I go back. And most of my recommendations are financial and operational based, so both. And for the most part, it's was the superintendent persuasive enough with his central administrative team to move the board forward and have them take some difficult actions if that's what it called for? And so that's really what I see the difference of the two organizations that either move forward or don't.
So when I appreciate that feedback, Jacob.
You bet.
Is that something that you think makes sense? And I'm just asking the question, like, if we said mid-school year, hey, we want you guys to come back in and give us a checkup from the neck up. Is that something that you think even that short of distance in, you could go, oh gosh, yes, there's value there. We can look at this, we can look at that, or other districts, when you've done this re-review, have you done it kind of in that time frame? Just to kind of an outside look at, how we're doing now.
I mean, me personally, you notice my financial recommendations, for example, phase in over a couple of years, at fund balance being one. So it depends upon the length of the recommendation, in my opinion. So 6 months in a school setting, as was discussed by one of your board members, oftentimes it takes us in schools a long time to turn the ship. We may make a little rudder changes or directional changes throughout the school year, but I would say, you're a good, and my team can pipe in, but you're a good 12 to 24 months out for, I believe that would be beneficial for a checkup if that was needed. I mean, you want to see some work a couple of years go 18 months, Helene, I think. I mean,
yeah, and I've never done it as formally as what Jake just described. However, as I'm thinking about your question, quite honestly, I'm thinking in 6 months' time. So should you really take the kind of deep look that you've been taking at the report, you can prioritize either by urgency, or sometimes there's some prioritizing based on, hey, we can do this fairly easily. And so as a team, district level, inclusive of the board, if you dig in, look at your priorities and say, and as you dig in further to your strategic plan, giving yourselves a timeline, I don't know that it's 6 months from now, but I believe a neutral set of eyes can do some investigation, if you will, some exploration of, you said, here were our priorities. Here are the steps we've taken. Now, do you see and do you hear evidence of us doing that? For longer lasting change, I couldn't agree more with Jake. Nancy and I have been working with a consultant through the Inclusionary Practices Project, Dr. Katie Novak, and she talks about implementation science and how it really takes 5 to 7 years to fully embrace an initiative or bodies of work. So it's incremental. I do think 8 months out, we could look at some things, and when I say we, a team, and it's all based around also what your priorities are in making changes.
Yeah. And let me be clear. I certainly know that we aren't going to solve our problems in 6 to 8 months, right? Like, I know I'm not there, but I guess where I'm at, and I'm in a management leadership role in my 9 to 5, right? And so the challenge I find, especially with teams that have gotten way off of the rails, is that if missteps are exasperated, right? You take one step, you move down a path, you think you're doing the right thing, you take 2 steps in the wrong direction, and it takes 4 steps to correct and get back on the path. So I guess I don't want to waste any time with potential missteps or something that you guys, and you're, again, leaning on the smartest people in the room, which is the entire team, including you guys. I just don't want us to necessarily walk too far down, or if you feel like, well, why haven't you guys prioritized this? We could talk more about that offline. I don't want to beat that up too bad, but I guess, and I could talk to Dr. Emmett, obviously, and see if he thinks there's value there or not. But, I think maybe there might be, but if you think there isn't, it's going to be longer, that's fine. The only other question that I had was, I guess, Dr. M, do you, the standard operating procedure that you're working on, is that, I guess, I'm still just trying to realize where or understand kind of what that looks like or anything. Is there, and I know you're going to talk more about the board at a different meeting, but are you envisioning the board having any input in that or that's coming to the board? Or is that just something that kind of happens, you deal with your admin team and then that kind of gets dispersed that way? I guess
It is the latter.
Okay.
But I go back to sort of this theme that we've talked about of we need to have more of a tight approach or more prescriptive than we've had in the past. And that's what this would be.
Okay. So just to Helene, because I think you made a comment about kind of SOPs and stuff like that in some of your comments about it's, it's just kind of in paper or something. I apologize if I'm misquoting you. I guess, what are your thoughts on us kind of developing a standard operating practice, kind of how we're leading in this area? Any thoughts or concerns or anything there?
Actually, it might be Nancy who has thoughts specifically. I think that was an area that she digged in more deeply to. So I don't want to speak, but I'm also watching Jake shaking his head no.
Go ahead, Jake.
No, go ahead, Nancy.
Well, if I'm understanding your question, I mean, I think that there are some, I was talking about some specific procedures around special education. Just making sure that they're clear, they're within the parameters of the law and the IEP process. I think that it's just always good to look at what those procedures are and those practices, and making sure that everyone understands them. I think that's what I was referring to. And so it is good sometimes to write those down, to have those in. It doesn't mean that they're etched in stone forever, because, in special education, the law does change and you have to adjust your procedures, but you want to make sure that you have some very clear practices that everybody does. So whether it's in an elementary, a middle, and a high school. So that's what I was referring to. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it just helps for clarity. And I think also from a special ed director standpoint, we have to always ensure that we're following not only best practice, but we're following the law, that we're making sure that we're honoring the IEP process and all those things. And that's where those procedures really come handy for everybody to make sure that they're solid in their understanding. I don't know, Jake, would you agree with kind of what I just said?
No, I agree, and it would be remiss of us not to mention when we talk about special education staffing in particular, that the staffing, as we speak about in our report, has to be driven by the IEP. And also the reviewer, I acknowledge that it is difficult and it can take some time to reduce one-on-one para staffing, because it is dependent upon the handicapping condition of the child and what the IEP is driving for support. So it's not a simple thing to reduce, but it has to be, and it has to be done thoughtfully and legally. So I did want to make sure that all of those around the table understood that it's not as simple as reducing a basic ed staff member. It has to be driven, of course, as we talked about, by the IEP in particular, but also it needs to be done thoughtfully and within the bounds of the law. So those are all things to consider when we're reducing special education staffing or support. But I just wanted to go on the record about that. And sometimes that's the way our recommendations are written, because they need to be legally neutral as well. And so sometimes then you'll see in the language in the report that it is not, I won't say legally aggressive one way or the other. We try to be as neutral as we can in our written word. So, but it is important to acknowledge that. And that's why the procedures are always essential, because you need those in place so that you can thoughtfully look at the support you're providing.
Yeah, thank you. Essentially and I was just asking for clarity, because in my hearing of kind of, as you guys were going through your presentation, I got the feeling, obviously incorrectly, that you didn't necessarily, you had some concerns with kind of an SLP potentially, but maybe obviously I just kind of heard that wrong. So anyway, I don't want to take too much time. Go ahead, Director Beach.
Thank you. I did want to circle back and just, I'm pretty sure, Jake, this was your section of the report. I found my highlights. And actually, when I first read this, I'll have you know that though you're toward the end of the report, I didn't tail off and stop reading. I read the whole way through.
The
and
finance guy appreciates that. It doesn't
That's
always
right.
happen.
It's not my favorite, but I'll say that I read all the way through, and actually, Carl and I discussed this part of it. This struck out to me and made me circle back to the top of the page and read again, where it said, the change in ratios over time in paraeducator staffing is astounding. And the word astounding, like an emotional adjective in there, a word to describe, right? I guess it made me go right back to the top and take a second look and a third and many others. So going back, it says the growth in paraeducator support is not driven by increased enrollment, but rather a change of how Granite Falls serves students. When staff growth outpaces enrollment growth, get ready for it. It is a recipe for financial insolvency. And we saw it. We saw it this year. We went $1.6 million over budget doing it this way, right? Like a few more months and we could drive the ship aground, or whatever the shipping words are for that, right? Growth in paraeducator staffing for special education services in Granite Falls is not driven by enrollment. And the change in ratios over time is astounding, 117% growth. And then it goes on to say, this is where it says one-on-one paraeducator support should be the exception and not the rule when allocating staffing. An IEP should not guarantee full-time one-on-one paraeducator coverage, but should be worded such that it's like paraeducator support. And I'm paraphrasing that part, but not a guarantee. I appreciated that part. And I appreciated just knowing that, because I didn't know, like sitting here, I'm guessing that my peers didn't know. I don't know how to write an IEP, the truth is, but to think that wording such as that, simple words, change the requirements on the district, it changes how students are served, it changes my thought about least restrictive environments, suddenly just small words like that make a huge difference. And of course, we've talked before about all IEPs should be explicit about the phase out timeline for paraeducator support. And I think that's huge. And I appreciate you calling that out. And I appreciate you calling out that the inverse classified and certified staffing levels, that, that we have an inverse ratio there. It's important, and that we're not aligned with other Washington school districts. So wanted you to know that I read all the way to the end on that. And I appreciate you pointing that out. I know that for me, these are some of the first things that we had to take action on, because of course, as you've heard, it's that time of year where we have to turn in our budget. So that has been, though it was the second half of the report, it was the part that had to move to the front of the to-do list just because of the annual budget requirements by the state. And let's see, the reviewer believes that increased staffing support or assigning one-on-one paraeducator allocations to simply qualify for safety net funding is not financially prudent. In fact, as demonstrated by the financial data, the district must expend a significant amount of funds prior to reimbursement. And it's symptomatic of the current special education delivery model. So I appreciated that you spent the time to dig in there, because I felt like something was not but I appreciate that you went in there, because I think there was a line, and I don't have it right here, where you said we had to spend was it $1.2 million before we recovered the first $1 in safety net? Was that? So
Yes.
did I read that?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yep, the district, so we were $1.6 million over budget. And the district had to outlay 1.2 million plus prior to any reimbursable expenditures. Like that one sentence. Well, there it is. So I appreciate you doing the analysis there. Just because I don't know why I had to see it written on the paper, but at least like once I saw it, I go, oh, that was that hunch I felt. So I appreciate that. I just realized we're at 7:30. I want to make sure that Director Dane.
Well, I just short. I came onto this board on my first meeting and heard Marshall's report that we were already sinking in the hole financially. And had no idea what was going on. And through the process over the last several months, listening to Dr. Middleton address that, having the board and Dr. Middleton request this PLUSA review and report gives me hope that we are moving in the right direction. It is, you know, we had the one fun time with the graduations, but it has been a challenging event to come on to the board at this time. I am very supportive of what I'm seeing in the direction that our administration is moving. I do like the idea that members of the board are recognizing that we shouldn't be in a position to micromanage, but to make sure that we are checking in quite often. It sounds like with some changes in our board meetings, we will be getting the information that we need to make sure that management is following the recommendations made by WASA. And so again, I have hope that we will move forward and have a positive outcome from something that was pretty negative when I started.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Additional questions? Well, I appreciate everyone taking the time. Thank you to the review committee for coming tonight, presenting, listening in a little bit, and we look forward to, I think it sounds like we want to at least touch base as we're going through the process to make sure, as Carl mentioned, when is the right time to invite you back to take another look to make sure we're on a path and headed in the correct direction and haven't strayed too far. So thank you again for your time. Appreciate your time. Thank you to the community and staff and parents that have come tonight to listen in. Appreciate that. Thank you, Dr. Middleton, for your time tonight. And 7:33, we will adjourn.